Good morning. I'm Deborah Baum, Chair of the 9th Congressional District Democratic Committee. Pull that down just a little bit. I think the rain is holding up a few folks from arriving. From the committee, welcome to Clifton Forge and the historic Masonic Theater for our second of our 4 candidate forums. For those that are not able to attend the forum today, this is being broadcast on our 9th CD Facebook page as a live event. We encourage you to post and tweet. However, please preserve the bandwidth by not broadcasting yourselves, since we already have that in place. The Wi-Fi password is on the screen. I don't know, it's not popped up yet, but it Okay, so please post and tweet as we move on. The 9th District fared extremely well for nearly 30 years under the Democratic Congressman Rick Boucher, and his efforts can be seen all across the district. His GOP successor in that office has hardly been seen in 8 years. It's time, past time, for a change, and we have candidates to do just that. In 108 days, on June 12th, we have a Democratic primary, and you will choose our nominee for Congress. Today, in the northernmost county of the 9th District, we invite you to meet our candidates, Anthony Flaccavento and Justin Santopietro. I want to say a couple things. If you have not yet gotten involved with your local committee, please contact them. You will find their information on our website, va9thcddems.com. You will find all of that information on your ticket. It has all of the Facebook page for our committee, our website, along with both Justin and Anthony's information, so please check that out and share with friends. And our candidates need 1,000 petition signatures to be placed on the ballot, and it's tradition that we sign each of their petitions. If you have not already done so, you will find them on the tables in the lobby. It is vital that you strongly support your candidate, but it is equally important to know that since our 2 Democratic candidates are light years better for our district than the person currently occupying the office, we will all come together and support and elect our nominee, and after June 12th, we will all come together. Agreed? Agreed. Some thank yous are in order. Thank you to the Allegheny Highlands Democratic Committee, if you will please stand, and also to the chair, Dr. Ron Goins, and his wife, Susan. Thank you to the members of the 9th Congressional District Democratic Committee. Some of them are here today, if you will stand. Thank you to our elected officers, current and past, some whom are here today. If you will please stand. Thank you. I was passed along a name. I felt like there were a couple here, but maybe they're outside in the lobby chatting. Thank you to our moderator and my good friend and yours, Senator Creigh Deeds. The purpose of the forum is to introduce our candidates for you to hear their views. The candidates will each have opening and closing remarks, each up to 2 minutes. Questions asked of the candidates today come from 2 sources: publicly submitted and from the audience here today. In addition to many of the questions already submitted, you have the index cards to submit a question from which 2 or more will be selected. If you would like to write down a question, the postcards and pencils are out in the lobby. They will be picked up shortly. Our moderator will ask the questions of each candidate. They can respond up to 2 minutes, and then the moderator can ask a brief follow-up, to which each candidate can respond up to 1 minute. The candidates will alternate who answers first to each question posed, and this forum beginning with Anthony Flaccavento. Our timekeeper today is our 9th CD Secretary, Kim Chiappetto. Our candidates that are here with us today, Justin Santopietro is born and bred in Southwest Virginia, who is running for the 9th Congressional District Democratic nomination in 2018. He is experienced public policy and government affairs professional who worked in Washington, D.C. for several years. He spent his career in the U.S. Senate as a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Center of Effective Government, and the Credit Union National Association. Other than the years he spent in the nation's capital, Justin has lived his entire life in Southwest Virginia, spending countless hours hiking the Appalachian Trail, paddling and fishing the New River, and biking up and down the Blue Ridge Mountains. Justin deeply treasures the natural beauty of Southwest Virginia, and its culture, and the Barter Theater to Floyd Fest, to the Galax Old Fiddlers Convention. He wants to put experience to work by representing his Southwest Virginia home and the United States House of Representatives. Anthony Flaccavento. Anthony is a farmer, small business owner, and economic development consultant from Abingdon, Virginia, who has lived and worked in Virginia's 9th District for 32 years. He is married to Laurel Flaccavento, a retired public school teacher, and is a father of Josh and Maria and Alex. Anthony will be working congressperson who restores real representation and fights to level the playing field for the people in the 9th. His practical experience and accomplishments working with local leaders, entrepreneurs, farmers, and young people across much of the district uniquely equipped him to address the challenges we face. Anthony has a bachelor's degree in agriculture and environmental science from the University of Kentucky, and a master's degree in economic and social development from the University of Pittsburgh. He is an author of the book, Building a Healthy Economy from the Bottom Up, along with many published articles and op-eds. Our moderator, Senator Creigh Deeds, began his public service in 1987 when he was elected to serve as the Commonwealth's Attorney of Bath County. He has represented the 25th District since 2001, and prior to that, he was a member of the House from 1992 to 2001. He serves on 3 Senate standing committees. The first one, Courts of Justice. The second is Privileges and Elections. And third, Transportation. He was the Democratic nominee for Attorney General of Virginia in 2005 and Governor of Virginia in 2009. He is married to Siobhan. He is a member of Millboro Presbyterian Church. Senator Deeds chairs the Joint Subcommittee to study mental and health services in the 21st century. He also serves on the Small Business Commission, the Standards of Learning Innovation Committee, the State and Water Commission, the Joint Commission on Transportation, Accountability, and the Joint Committee to Study Interstate 73. I'd now like to turn over the forum to our moderator, Senator Deeds.
Okay, Thank you all very much, and thanks for coming. Bobby Kennedy wrote once, said that it's easy for each of us to sit in the comfort of our friends, to have a quiet life in business, and just enjoy life. The more difficult life, and the one that's more rewarding, is that of public service. So I want to applaud these candidates, these people. We're going to start with opening statements from each one of them, and I think Anthony Flaccavento, you're first, so you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Senator Deeds. Well, I'm delighted to be here with you all this morning. It's a fabulous gathering, not such a great day, but a beautiful, beautiful place. Thanks to the 9th Congressional District Committee for the work they did, and for Senator Deeds for moderating. You know, it's interesting to me that we've had two. This is our second forum of the 9th District Committee Candidates Forums, and both of them have been in restored historic downtown theaters, first in Pennington Gap, and then in this beautiful place in Clifton Forge. And it makes me aware of the fact that so much of the good work that's happening in the 9th District is about building on our assets, building on our strengths. They range from our land and our forests to our downtowns and our historic buildings. And when we do that, and the work that I've been privileged to be part of the last 30-some years has been a lot about finding those assets, building on them, and developing our strengths together. And yet, we're at a time in our country where, in most respects, we're doing just the opposite with the policies that are coming from this administration. We're not building on our assets, we're undermining them and tearing them down. We're not cultivating our strengths together, we're pulling us apart. So the real question we face right now is, can we change that? Can one guy, in this case, change it? And I think the answer is yes, so long as all of us take on this task and do the everyday work that we have to do in our own places, in our own towns, in our communities, building ourselves and our neighbors up, and then getting a representative to Congress who will work with you, truly represent you, to help continue to cultivate those strengths. That's what I hope to do. Thank you.
Now, Justin Santopietro.
Well, thank you, Senator Deeds, and thank you all for coming here this afternoon now. It's great to be here in Clifton Forge, one of my favorite. This Allegheny area is one of my favorite parts of the state. I grew up in Blacksburg, and we had a lot of fun stuff to do there, but I remember back when I was still a teenager, the first time I came up here was to do something called the Bath County Triathlon in beautiful Lake Muma, and since then I have absolutely fallen in love with this area, and especially Lake Muma, and I've been up here many times. I've had really good times up here, whether it was camping or fishing on the Jackson River. In fact, my friends and I, right out of high school, after we graduated high school, instead of going to the beach like some people do, we actually came up to Lake Muma and camped up here. You know, it's almost like the water is so clean, it's so peaceful up there, it's almost like you're at the beach, but you know, it's only an hour-and-a-half drive instead of 4 or plus, and so we go up there, it's peaceful, people would leave us alone, and we could have fun when we were still young. Now, it's been a few years since I've done that, but I've gotten a little more serious about things since then, and even though I'm a young man, I like to say that I'm running as an old school Democrat. And basically what that means is more in the vein of FDR, Lyndon Johnson, Harry Truman, and the many senators and congressmen at the time who you could really call statesmen. They were there because they believed in public service, as Creigh said. They understood that this job requires an extra degree of effort and labor and making sure you're connected to the people. And so that means focusing the federal government on the material improvements in people's lives. As much as possible, focusing on the economics, on health care, and that's what they did. They passed some of the most seminal pieces of legislation. Really, everything that's made the lives we have today were passed by Democrats. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, environmental protection, consumer protection, the list goes on and on. We have always been on the right side of history, and we should not be ashamed to say that, especially now. So that's why I'm running for Congress, and I hope I'll have your support. Thank you.
Okay, the rules give me the prerogative, I guess, to ask follow-up questions, and I just want you to know that my instructions here say we're supposed to finish questions by 11:55, so we can get out of here. That means that I'm going to keep my questions to a minimum because I want your questions to be asked. The first question is relates to a problem we're all really aware of, particularly in the 9th District, but also in much of rural America, and it goes to Mr. Flaccavento, to Anthony. The impact of drug overdose deaths is increasing all across the country and affects everyone. What solutions would you propose to combat this catastrophe?
Certainly, that is a huge, huge problem across the 9th District. And my understanding of it is we have to really take on both prevention, stopping the flow of opioids in the first place or reducing the flow to a manageable level, and then moving from incarceration approaches to treatment approaches. First, on prevention. We still, in 2015, even though the rates have been coming down, according to a study from the CDC, we're prescribing 3 times more opioids now than just in 1999. Kim, do I have 2 minutes? I think I have 2 minutes for the question, no? That would be useful to know. I think I have 2 minutes for the first question. I didn't want to talk that fast. So we really have to deal with that. We're still overprescribing. It's happening certainly in some notorious pill mills, but just as a general rule, the length of prescriptions is too long. We need to tackle that as part of prevention. We also need to hold big pharma accountable. Let's be honest. We've all heard the studies about Purdue and others and how they have marketed these drugs deceptively, downplaying their addictive qualities. Both of those things would be part of the prevention strategy. Now, treatment, there's a lot of emerging and exciting opportunities, from drug courts to medically assisted treatment programs. They work. The problem is we don't make them accessible. Some author said it's much easier to get high than it is to get help. So we need to invest in the clinics, invest in the kind of care that's going to enable people, like what I saw in the Giles County Drug Court, to actually be able to get their lives back together, to overcome their addiction, and to start functioning again in society.
Well, I'm going to ask a follow-up. Do you see any connection between the drug companies' advertising and the increase of our dependence on opioids?
Oh, no question. That dependence, it parallels what the tobacco companies did for all those years. When they first of all denied that there was any real problem with tobacco, either its addictive problems or its problems on health for many, many years, in spite of the evidence. Same sort of pattern with the big pharma companies, absolutely. And again, they have pushed those drugs out there with massive marketing campaigns and with incentives to healthcare professionals to provide those. So absolutely a very strong connection, and that needs to be reined in.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Pietro, I'm sorry.
Same question, correct?
Yeah, same question, but help me with your name.
Santopietro.
Santopietro.
There you
okay.
go.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a hard one, so I just go by Justin. That's why all our stuff just says Justin, and my last name is in tiny font. Just 2 weeks ago, I was up in Wise County, and I was talking to a gentleman, a young man, not much older than me, who had struggled with opioid addiction for 3 years, and he was actually, when we met him, 3 years clean. So he was a success story, but the way that he got into the addiction in the first place was, in my view, the result of a policy failure. And that was, as an 18-year-old high school student, he got caught with marijuana. And he was put on probation, which means he had to take a monthly urine test to make sure he wasn't on drugs. So because he couldn't take marijuana, because the THC stays in your system for 30 days, a friend of his came up and said, "Hey, you want to get high? I have this pill for you. It'll flush out of your system in 3 days." So in his case, he got hooked on opioids because marijuana was illegal. And that one pill sent him on a 3-year, really hard struggle to get off of those drugs. And I can't help but thinking, if the policies on cannabis and marijuana had been a little more proactive at the time, he might not have gotten into that spiral. The reason that these drugs are so prolific and have just poured into these areas is the result of the power of special interests and money in Washington. This is something that affects just about every policy issue that we deal with, but it's especially relevant here because the DEA, the FDA, the federal agencies, the protector agencies that are supposed to be cracking down on these doctors that are overprescribing and the pharmaceutical companies that frankly lied about their effects all through the 90s, don't have the resources they need to adequately enforce the legal authority they already have. And that's because the drug industry wants it that way. They're constantly attacked. They're constantly under very scrupulous review from members of Congress who take a lot of money from this industry. And of course, the political appointees now from the Trump administration are atrocious. They're not going to do anything about this crisis. So as a congressman, I would focus a lot on the oversight of these agencies so they have the resources and the time to do their job.
Let me ask a follow-up, if I
Sure.
could. From your answer, it sounds like you would support delisting marijuana as a class.
Correct.
And leaving it. Would you leave it to the states, or would you have a policy that exists nationwide?
Yeah, I would, as a federal congressman, I would want that taken off of the federal list. And the reason is that a lot of the struggles, having worked in the financial services world, all banks, whether they're chartered at state or federal level, are part of the Federal Reserve System, which means they have to follow federal law. So even if states legalize it, it's still very difficult for these dispensaries and these marijuana businesses to use the banking system. So a lot of them have to deal exclusively in cash. They have massive amounts of cash just sitting around. It's very dangerous. So it has to be at the federal level to make it an actual functional system, so it actually comes off the street and can become a legitimate business.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay. I'd appreciate it if you'd save your applause till the end so we can get through more questions. The next question, do we alternate? Yeah. Okay. The next question goes to Justin, and I've got another related. I want marijuana, and I want you, Anthony, to have a chance to address marijuana too, but we'll talk about it later. Justin, in the wake of yet another gun violence tragedy, there's once again a movement to stop this from ever happening again. This time it's being led by teenagers in Florida. A big part of the problem is how little we actually know about gun violence, in large part because of an amendment adopted in Congress in 1996, the Dickey Amendment, which prohibits gun violence study. What course of action would you propose to seek short-term and long-term solutions to preventing gun violence?
Yeah, so it's been the last 2 weeks or 12 days have been pretty amazing to see the activism and the power of these young high school students putting themselves in front of national media and saying enough is enough. So maybe this time will be the straw that breaks the camel's back and we can make some progress. But the reason, as we all know, that we haven't been able to is because the National Rifle Association is so powerful. They have frankly, they have a large network of supporters and they have a lot of money that they give to politicians. And because of things like gerrymandering and these very far-right districts, if any Republican even hints at the idea of doing something on gun control, the NRA immediately threatens them with a primary, and sometimes they're afraid that they might actually lose. So this is the power of that organization is atrocious. It is gone far beyond just advocating for gun rights. It is a right-wing political organization, and it has to be treated as such from now on. It does not represent all gun owners. It doesn't represent hunters or sportsmen. It represents mostly the industry and their desire to make money. The things that I support, I think we can have there's a lot of support in the gun community for actually fixing the background check system. It's a federal system that's already in place, but it has so many holes, both in the reporting side and in the checking side. So I've been to these gun shows. I've seen the booths that are there that everyone is supposed to go to if they're doing a private sale to do the check. And yeah, the booth is there, but I don't, how many FBI agents or ATF agents are actually there walking around making sure that people are doing these checks? We have no idea, again, because these agencies don't have the resources they need. So we need to improve the background check system from start to finish. I think we can also come to some serious agreement on limiting the size of these magazines. Now, everyone who hunts, every sportsman, anyone who cares about actually being an accurate shooter they know they don't need 10, 20 rounds, right? If you're a hunter, if you miss your first shot, that's kind of it. You don't need 8 more in your magazine, right? So this is something that we can come to agreement on. These extended mags are very dangerous, and they basically only serve the purpose of creating a lot of human damage.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Anthony, you've got the same question. What course of action would you propose to seeking both short-term and long-term solutions to preventing gun violence?
Yeah, absolutely. So very similar policy. The one thing that seems to be actually debatable right now is the background check system, the need to strengthen it, the need to integrate it. We heard of the example of the shooter in Texas who the Army knew was a domestic violence perpetrator and was otherwise should not have held a gun, but somehow that did not make it into the overall federal database. So syncing and integrating all of the databases, it's also we need some changes. For instance, right now, if you are convicted of domestic violence, theoretically at least, you are prohibited from purchasing a firearm. But if you are stalking your girlfriend and beating her up, but you're not in a formal relationship, you can still get a firearm. So there needs to be ways to close those very serious things, because again, we know of these horrific mass shootings. They're far more common in the United States than just about anywhere else. And at the same time, there's dramatically more people being killed by guns day in and day out through domestic violence, through problems in our towns and cities. So the background check system is number one. The other thing we have to do right off the bat is just say what's true, which is that our federal policy for the last generation about guns, for the reasons Justin went into at the NRA, has been very explicitly to do nothing. So the time is now to say we got to do something, and we should do several things. The background check system, limits on the firepower. And the firepower isn't just AR-15s. There's all kinds of guns out there with tremendous firepower. A third thing is remove that ridiculous 1996 policy that prohibited the federal government from studying the causes of gun violence. And then the last thing I'd say is to put more resources into mental health, more resources into domestic violence prevention and protection, and the other things that are often contributors to this problem as well.
Okay. Why don't you can just stay up there if you want, because the next question, how would you recommend educating our region, specifically Southwest Virginia's students, to be critical thinkers, broadly educated, and employable with current tech skills? Can we have it all? Can we have the economy we had and a new economy? Well, what do you propose for revolutionizing our economy?
So in terms of the education piece of that, this past Monday I had a little town hall with folks in Washington County, teachers in Washington County. About a dozen came out for that. And I said a couple words about myself, and then I just said, so what are your issues in education? What do you think is wrong, and what are your ideas for fixing it? And we had 45 minutes of a floodgate of both concerns, frustrations, and ideas to fix things. And this is what's common. My wife Lori taught public school for over 30 years, and we do know how to make education more successful. Number one of the things these teachers said is the federal government has got to stop giving schools mandates, especially mandates about passing certain standardized tests on which the teachers, the students, and the schools are evaluated, giving mandates without giving resources. We should really flip that around. The federal government should be investing much more in public schools, particularly to lift up struggling schools in rural and urban areas, and then simultaneously should be freeing up teachers, who after all are education professionals, to do what they do well. And that would mean moving away from this standardized approach to hands-on learning, to experiential learning, to what's called project-based assessments. We can do these things, we should do these things, because whether it's technical education, learning existing skills like welding and carpentry and electricians, or whether it's learning new skills, 21st century tech skills, or whether it's even the arts and all of those expressive parts of education, what we know is that students learn better, the learning lasts longer when they're allowed to fully engage, bring their own experience in. That works. That's the model the federal government should be setting, along with additional resources.
Okay. Justin, why don't you give a shot at that? What would you do to, or what would you recommend for educating our students for today's workforce?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why our schools struggle so much, especially in rural America, is because we're still stuck in this 18th century model of school funding, which is based on local property taxes. So what happens when a big economic employer leaves the area? The property taxes go down, people move out, and they have less money for the schools. So I think we should start to transition away from this model. That's why I proposed in my education platform a $3,000 per student per year grant from the federal government directly to the school districts, not through the states, but directly to the school district, so they can have those funds to create as many, a broad spectrum of classes as possible. Now, I understand the drive for STEM and vocational education, right? That's fine. But I am adamant that we have to have well-rounded students coming out of our schools, and that means you have to keep the art classes, you have to keep music, you have to keep shop, you have to keep recess and gym and all those things that make for well-rounded students. And I was fortunate in Montgomery County. It was we had a lot of those types of classes and advanced placement classes, but I know that's not the case in many parts of the district because of those this ridiculous funding model that we're still stuck on. And as Anthony said, even from the very beginning, I despise standardized tests, whether it's SATs, the SOLs, the LSATs. I like to say that standardized tests produce standardized people. And we don't need more of that in this country. We need people who are critical thinkers, who have creativity, because really that's our strength in the United States, is that we have people who think like that. That's why we have the most entrepreneurs per capita. That's why we own all the patents, even for the stuff that's made abroad. We own the patents for those things because we are a creative people. And we cannot stop investing in the ability of students to do that. And in fact, in my experience, those artistic classes or vocational classes are the reason why a lot of people go to school, and some kids stay in school because they know they'll have at least an hour a day to do something that they like. So the fact that we're cutting these programs is unacceptable, and we need to get that federal funding in there to keep those programs going.
Okay, stay up there. I'm going to go on to the next question because I want to get all these questions in. Do you support organized labor? Do you support unions for workers in the private and the public sectors? If so, how would your leadership aid the rights and quality of life for the workforce?
Right. I'm absolutely a supporter of labor and the power that workers get through that organization. Now, one of my first experiences in Washington was seeing the Employee Free Choice Act, or EFCA, which Democrats had promised for years and years, and they had supermajority in the House and Senate and White House. They didn't pass it. They had a version in the House and Senate, but it never even got to a final vote on the floor. This is one of the most disappointing. The Democrats did a huge disservice to their own base by failing to pass EFCA, as it's known. Now, since 2009, it hasn't come up again because, of course, the Republicans will never do it. So it's up to the Democrats to reaffirm their connection to organized labor, to say this is the way that we built the middle class in the first place, and this is the only way that we're going to rebuild the middle class now. And so the provisions of EFCA are two major provisions that I'm absolutely in favor of. One is what's called card checks. So it makes it much easier for employees to just merely state that they want to form a union. So that's the first step. And the second step is something called first contract arbitration, where what happens now is even if employees decide they want to form a union, management has basically an infinite timeline to keep delaying the votes, to push in their propaganda, to divide workers against each other because they can keep delaying the vote. So what first contract does is it sets a hard timeline for labor and management to come to their first contract. If they can't do that, they go to federal mediation. If that doesn't work, they go to federal arbitration, where a decision is made, the contract is set in place, and that union can start to actually get those benefits that they deserve. Right now, that isn't happening because the law is so weak. The National Labor Relations Board is totally underfunded. Like most boards and commissions in Washington, it's split between Republican and Democrats, so they never have a consensus to get anything done. All of this has to change because there's no way, in my opinion, that we build the middle class back again, especially now with all this part-time and contract labor, until we bring back the power of organized labor again.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, you want to give that one a shot?
Yep.
Very, very strong supporter of organized labor. I was really, really privileged back in 1989 and 1990 to spend most of a year when I was living in St. Paul with the United Mine Workers during their strike against Pittston Coal, because Pittston Coal wanted to do one simple thing. They wanted to cancel the miners' health insurance card. Now, you've all heard about the black lung epidemic that has just been a total resurgence of black lung over the last decade, basically. And so here are miners who are putting their health at risk. Very taxing job, and yet the company wanted to take it away. They fought, a lot of the community fought with them, and they won that fight. But unions have been losing in the long run, and it's not because people don't want unions. Over 50% of workers say they would like to join a union, even as our private sector union rate and public sector union rate has declined dramatically. So why is it? Well, we should have passed the Employee Free Choice Act, because what you'll hear from conservatives at times is, no, no, that's not democratic. You can't let people just sign a card and not have an election. The fact of the matter is that right now the law, the playing field between workers and management, workers in the company, is so uneven. Workers are routinely restricted from putting up pro-union literature. They're routinely restricted from talking about unions, while over 90% of companies during a potential union drive actually speak to they require their workers to go to anti-union sessions, including with their own supervisors. So we have a playing field in the workforce that is terribly uneven, that the Employee Free Choice Act would help fix. We need that along with a much stronger National Labor Relations Board than we've had in quite some time. But absolutely, without unions, we don't have a political counterforce to the extreme wealth of this country. We desperately, desperately need them.
Okay, I'm just stay there. I've got another question, completely different. I'm going to use part of my prerogative, I guess. One of the great exports of rural areas and throughout the country, and certainly here and throughout the 9th District, has been the export of our young people. There's nothing for them to do. What do you propose, or do you have ideas to propose that would empower these young people to stay in their communities or to return home? And at the same time, what unique qualities of this congressional district do you think exist that exist to attract employers?
Absolutely. I'll tell you that in research I did a couple of years ago, I found a community in western Minnesota, rural Minnesota, an 8-county area, not too different from Southwest Virginia, except a heck of a lot colder. And what they did was they changed the emphasis of their economic policy from giving lucrative deals to big international corporations and big boxes to focusing on their existing manufacturers and their existing businesses. And over a course of a little more than a decade, these businesses grew. They doubled their employment, wages went up, other kinds of businesses grew. And what happened as a result of that, besides more jobs and better jobs, was that the outmigration of young people flipped from 2 out of every 3 leaving when they finished high school or college to 2 out of every 3 staying. So the first thing we need to do is clearly we need to create more and better jobs, better paying jobs, jobs that are more fulfilling. The good news is that effort is underway around the 9th. It's just, again, like many things, badly under-resourced, badly underfunded. When we create better jobs, in combination with helping to revitalize our downtowns, opening up music like Abingdon has with its Thursday night jams, or Galax has with its Fiddlers Convention, or a little town like St. Paul, where I've worked over the years, that not only has a music scene, trails, both hiking, biking, and ATV. They have a craft brewery in a town of 975 people and just opened a hotel built into old buildings with restored material. St. Paul is an example of what's possible because as a result of their community revitalization and the creation of some new businesses, they are in fact keeping more of their young people, and some are coming back home, including the chef at the restaurant that just opened. So that's the combination. It's more and better jobs, a more vital economy, and the amenities of life. They revitalize culture, music, outdoor recreation. That's, I think, how we keep young people here.
I spent a night in St. Paul years ago, but that's all I'm going to say about it. Justin, do you want to give that one a shot?
Yeah, there's got to be a bartender with a story or something. So yeah, I was in college. I was very fortunate to benefit from something called the Federal Work-Study Program, and I've basically taken that idea and modeled it into what I call the Rural Jobs Creation Program. And how that works is if a recent college graduate is employed in a rural designated area, which is already defined in law, the federal government will become a partner with that business to provide 2/3 of the cost of hiring that employee. The business then pays 1/3 of it. So this is a really fast and easy way to get money right out of the Treasury and into rural districts all across the country, because you don't have any complicated, employment schemes or long tax forms. This is you have the businesses that already exist. They know the type of workers they need, but what do they always say? We can't afford to hire people. It takes too long. The insurance, everything is too expensive. So I say, okay, let's have the federal government be your partner in employing people in this area. So the people that come here for college or that are born here can actually have enough income to actually afford to live here. Now, I have heard from so many people, friends my age, that leave areas like this and go elsewhere for work. I say, where are you going? Oh, I'm in Washington. I'm in Nova. I'm in Richmond. Why do they go there? Because that's where the money is. But even if they get paid more, what they sacrifice, and what I sacrifice going up there, is quality of life. It's hard to beat this Southwest Virginia for quality of life. It is calm, it is peaceful, you have very little traffic, the people are generally very, very nice and welcoming. That's not the case in Nova. That's not the case in DC. I live there, I can say that for certain. So that's one of our greatest resources, is we can say to people, to workers and employers, we have a great quality of life here. Come here and start a business, and if you do that, the federal government will be your partner in ensuring that you can actually remain, you can afford to hire these people at a competitive wage so they don't go elsewhere where they might be offered more money, and they can become part of this community. The money is here, the money stays here, they spend it in these craft breweries and at a barbecue place, and that's how these businesses, especially the new ones, can stay open and hopefully thrive.
Oh, just stay there, because I've got another tough question.
Okay.
Protecting the air and water quality is paramount to our quality of life and follows up it's part of the quality of life in the 9th District you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. The reality is, however, there are 5 counties to the southwest of us that have seen their prosperity tied to coal mining and fossil fuels. Do you see us as rejuvenating the coal industry or somehow reducing our dependence on fossil fuels? And at the same time, if we do that, how do we maintain or build our standard of living?
Yeah, so the answer to the coal question is really not political. It's about hard economics. It's just the money. So I look at the sales data from the federal government about coal, and the average price for a short ton of coal from Appalachia is about $45 to $50. The average price of short ton of coal from Illinois, from the Powder Basin, Wyoming, is $15 to $20. That pretty much says all you need to know about how this industry is going forward. We simply can't compete with coal that's that cheap. That's mostly the steam coal that gets burned for energy. Now, what we can do, and what some of the coal mines have been doing in this area, is focusing on a different quality of coal that's used in steel production. So that can be a future source of income for this area, but it will never be like it was before. You'll never have the quantity of mining. You'll never have the income going to the workers like you used to. So that can't be everything. But I worked in environmental and air quality water regulations for a good period of time in Washington. And the biggest barrier that I found was, I have nothing against regulations. It's always a good thing. But what we do is then we just force the businesses to pay for the entire cost of compliance. Now, I worked in regulatory compliance. I know how complicated it can be. But I don't see why, for public policy purposes, we can't just help these companies just pay for the scrubbers and to clean up the coal ash ponds and all these things that benefit everybody. This is a public good. It's a public necessity. You get a lot less political fighting and pushback if you can help those businesses absorb the costs. I don't see any harm in doing that, and I think it would go a long way towards bridging the gap between the environmental community and the business community, especially in areas like this where the business community is so concentrated in one industry. I think that's a good way forward, and I hope that we can, if that money comes again to put in this control equipment, that also creates a lot of jobs. It's welding, it's installation, it's construction. So I think we have to start thinking that environmental quality and job creation are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, well, and I agree with that. Let me ask you, Rick Boucher used to talk about clean coal, and that technology is billions of dollars away, I guess. But what's your view of that possibility?
Yeah, well, it is still extremely expensive. Carbon capture, sequestration is there are very few actual operations in place across the country. It is basically prohibitively expensive. Yeah, you can do it, but now that the price of other energy sources is coming down so fast, it just doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense. Now, when it comes to compliance for the particulate matter rules, mercury and sulfur dioxide, that can be managed with control technology that already exists. It's not super complicated like with the CO2 where you have to extract it and then pump it in the ground and then find something to do with it. That's a little more straightforward. So we can definitely make big strides in the reductions of those toxic chemicals, at least with the existing plants that we have. And frankly, the room to improve on CO2 emissions is not in energy production, it's in transportation, airplanes, trucks, and what a lot of people don't talk about is actually animal agriculture is a huge contributor to CO2 emissions that needs to be looked at as well. It shouldn't just be coal communities that pay the entire price.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, do you want to tackle both the sequestration issue and the first question about the economy, the
Only if
quality
Kim
of life?
gives me 3 minutes.
Okay. Kim, please give him 3 minutes and I won't ask the follow-up.
We'll save a couple of seconds. Yeah, absolutely. You know, years ago I started an organization called the Coalition for Jobs in the Environment, and I started it because in the span of just a few months, we saw some coal mining catastrophes. We saw the Louisiana Pacific plant in Dungannon shutter its doors because folks were fighting some of both the labor and environmental abuses, and over, it seemed like throughout the 9th District and most of Appalachia, we always were given this choice. Well, what do you want? Do you want jobs or do you want the environment? Do you want jobs or do you want workers to be able to protect themselves? This trade-off is a figment of our imagination. We don't need to make these choices. Instead, we need to invest in the creative businesses, the new technologies, and the infrastructure that allows people to do what they do better. Well, we all eat, we all depend on clean water, we all depend on a constant flow of energy, but many of us are removed from these things. This is one of the challenges we face. The environmental movement has done tremendous things going back to the Clean Water Act, but it also has become increasingly divorced from rural communities where, in fact, most of this work takes place, whether it's drilling for gas, digging coal, raising food, cutting logs, so we have materials for our structures. I'm a believer that all of those enterprises and more can be done in environmentally friendly, sustainable ways. When we were confronting the collapse of tobacco at the end of the 90s, going into 2000s, as the federal program was diminishing, we didn't go about attacking tobacco farmers. We figured out how to create alternatives for tobacco farmers to raise organic produce, eggs, meat, and other things, which we then built the infrastructure and created markets so this could be done on a substantial scale. Similarly, these kinds of things are happening in our forests. So for the coal mining community, what we need now is to put to best use those abandoned strip mine lands, where right now people are experimenting with solar farms on those. There's a very successful vineyard in Wise County called Rose Mountain Vineyards, and other people are focused on reforestation of those lands using new techniques so that eventually we can actually have both an economic and a clean energy or a clean environment right there in those communities. Sequestration, it's expensive and probably implausible that we're going to be pulling carbon out of a smokestack. But you know what does sequester carbon? Healthy forests. Deep soils. When farmers and foresters manage their land well, what happens is the biological processes that those plants pull carbon out of the atmosphere where we have too much and put it in the soil where it becomes organic matter. I've seen this on my own farm. I've seen it in other farms and grasslands, and even meat production can be done in this way. We can sequester a good chunk of the carbon, but it should be by investing in good soil management and healthy business practices. Thank you.
Okay, well, just stay up there. You've got the next one. You know, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. Right? Right? Okay, so trust in government, trust in Congress specifically, and our agencies of government and our leadership is constantly being eroded in a way that hurts people who actually need and use government services. Here in the 9th District, we were used to Rick Boucher making government work for us. What specific measures are you willing to take to try to restore trust in government?
Yeah, I think some of the mistrust in government is fair enough. It's real, based on the government not delivering what it should, and some of it's based on 40-year campaign to convince people that the government's bad, always, inefficient, coming to take your things from you. And so we have to counteract that narrative. But the way we're going to counteract it is by actually showing that public servants can be doing their job well. I think of the initiative that Sam Rasool has started this past year called the Democratic Promise, where his staff are reaching out to folks to just talk with them about what their issues are related to state government and to see if they can help. I think in a similar way, if we show, and this is my goal, if I get to Congress, on day one, I'm going to be going back to all those folks I've worked with over the last 30 years, local, state, and federal people, to make the work that they are doing more effective and more productive, whether it's the Appalachian Regional Commission, whether it's the Rural Development Agency within USDA, whether it's Department of Commerce. But if we can show on the ground that government partnered with local people, entrepreneurs, schools, young people, can actually deliver results, over time, won't happen overnight, but over time, I believe we can restore faith in government because people will see that, in fact, it's making their lives better. It's already doing that in many cases, but a lot of folks have lost sight of it. We simply need to redouble our efforts to make the government, at all levels, but especially the federal government, far more productive in people's lives. And we can do it. It's being done, and we can do much more of it.
Well, I want to ask a follow-up that's somewhat unrelated, but because Justin addressed this in an earlier question, what are your views on the legalization of marijuana, both for medicinal purposes and for recreational use?
Does legalizing marijuana have something to do with feeling better about the government? Is that what we're saying here?
Perhaps.
Yes, I'm for legalization of marijuana, and in part because it is an effective drug for many things, not only recreational use, but for medicinal use. But I'm also for expanding simultaneously the production of hemp. I know a gentleman in Blacksburg who is extracting medicinal compounds from hemp and finding tremendous success in a whole range of ailments and activities that people have to do. So I think in case of both marijuana and hemp, it ought to be legalized, and simultaneously we ought to be looking at how that can become part of the new economy in Southwest Virginia, both growing it but also processing it and distilling it down to its essence.
Okay. Justin, I want you to address the trust issue. How do you restore trust in government?
Yeah, so this is one of the things I'm most passionate about generally is good government. So, going into Washington, D.C., I had your traditional education about how government works, civics class, all that. Well, it turns out most of that isn't really true. Unfortunately, the modus operandi in Washington is special interest. It's special interest control. There are thousands and thousands of trade associations, of lobbying groups, and law firms that have lobbyists that all they do 24/7 is find ways to get what they want done for their clients, usually who have lots and lots of money. So the central reason why the government doesn't work is because the people with money don't want it to work for you or for me. They want government to work for them. And to the extent the government does work, it does work for them, not us. As we saw that tax bill. They threw that tax bill together in a really, really short period of time. They had total bonanza for the lobbyists. Something like 6,000 lobbyists were being paid to work on this issue. And they wrote it extremely quickly, literally scribbling in the margins, and they passed it very quickly because that's what the donors wanted. So that's why government works for the people who want it to. Now, one of the things that annoys me the most is the way Republicans attack federal employees. Some of the best people in Washington, I know people like to trash Washington, but I like to make the exception that the best people in D.C. are the professional civil servants that go into work 9 to 5, just like everybody else. They love what they do. They know that they're not paid as much as they should be, but they still go to work every day because they care about protecting the country and serving the people. And it's beyond time that we start recognizing them, recognizing the work that they do, and paying them more as well. It's extremely difficult now to get employed in the federal government, as I can say with experience, because there's that constant stigma, even among Democrats, that you shouldn't be working for the federal government. It shouldn't really be your career because it's not something that's worth doing. We need to be absolutely adamant about restoring that faith in government and saying that this can be a force for good in people's lives, and we shouldn't shy away from that.
And I appreciate your answer. Just stay up there. I've got several more questions, but we're out of time. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll go to the closing statements. You're in a precinct that voted for Michael Dukakis in 1988, mm-hmm. but in 2016 it voted for Donald Trump.
Yep.
What do we do to make the Democratic Party popular? How do we win as Democrats?
Yeah, well, I actually go back to what you said at Acres of Democrats, which is we had for a long time in this area in Southwest Virginia, not only Democrats but actual populist Democrats. And the best example that I always use is Pat Jennings, who served 3 or 4 terms in the 60s and 70s, was the only Democrat, House or Senate, from Virginia to vote for the Voting Rights Act and to vote for the creation of Medicare, right? From this area that we now think is so conservative and, we can't possibly win. He was one of the most progressive members of Congress, and he was from here. And he got, and they had electoral success doing that, as did Rick Boucher. So we can win here again by focusing on honest government, on good government, and going after people like Griffith, who are only there for the paycheck, for the career opportunities, and frankly, because the party and the donors picked him. And that is not a criteria for being a member of Congress. We don't need more toadies for the lobbyists who sit on the back bench and write goofy emails once a week. That is beyond unacceptable. And for guys like him, frankly, he is doing that to fulfill his campaign promise, which is government doesn't work. Government doesn't work. It doesn't work. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go to Washington to prove that to you. Well, they've been doing that for 30 years, and we have to break that cycle that they have concocted, that they have been doing for 30 years to delegitimize government, because, frankly, they have succeeded. They've succeeded big time. There's never been more dysfunction, whether it's in the Congress or the executive branch. The civil servants are retiring like crazy because they can't stand how they're being treated, and the political appointees under Trump are atrocious. So we can win again by saying government can work, and it will work if we listen to everyone who's actually in the district. If we can prove that we can win without a ton of money, we can go back to the people and say, they voted for me, they support me, not the PACs, not the big donors, which are 75% of Morgan's money.
Oh, okay, Anthony, you want to give that one a try?
Yeah, sure.
So one thing we probably should stop doing is, in our own circles, is saying, why do these people keep voting against their own interests? I've said it before. I bet many of us in this room have. Because when I look at it, sure, the Republicans are off the rails in so many